You were on the Apple TV before it even had an app store.
We decided to go with React Native Web, and that has paid off nicely because that is still very strongly maintained in the world. And we use that across our video player, our website, and our connected TV applications for the web targets. It was about combining, so we didn't have two different native applications.
What was the reaction of your native engineering team? It seems like you guys had a very good collaboration, which is great. That's always the dead spot across native and web where the knowledge gets lost. But it's not so easy when native engineers feel like, this is a subpar experience.
We have a lot less native code today than we did then, but it was critical to have those native engineers at that time. They're going to play football regardless of what our products are doing, but we want to be there to let our fans see it right along with the folks in the stadium.
React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to React Universe On Air podcast. Today with me, we have a very special guest, Michael from NFL. Michael, very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And today, this is an episode from the series where we talk about React Native at a scale, which means we are going to talk about the React Native adoption at NFL. We're going to dig through the history of decision-making, how it all went through, the migration, tips and tricks, and everything that you might find interesting when it comes to adapting and migrating to React Native from a native code base. So let's dive deep into it. Michael, you're a director of engineering at NFL. Could you please tell us a bit more about, what's your scope, what are your daily responsibilities, and a bit of your history at NFL to date?
So, like you said, I'm director of engineering at the NFL. I've been at the NFL for a little over 8.5 years at this point. Came on as a web engineer with focus on React. Now my responsibilities include our website, our connected TV applications, our identity management solution, our video player, which is cross-platform using React Native. And so touch of various different parts of what we build here at the NFL. Like I mentioned, it started off just as a member of the web team, kind of got my feet wet on the video player, and then about a year into my tenure here at the NFL, we made a shift over to React Native. I can get into more detail whenever you see fit, or if you want to do that right now.
Yeah, I was slowly starting to go that route. It seems like, considering your sort of very long track record, which is 9 years, I was sort of expecting for you to say that you've been there through the whole migration, right? So typically, as we know, those things don't take like a week, month. It's a years long process. So you're the right person to chat about what it was like back then. So maybe we can start with that. You mentioned a couple of platforms, and every time I chat with people that are close to sports and activities, there is always so many platforms beyond just mobile. So I'll be down to understand and learn a bit more about your connected TVs and all those things, like how it all plays together, how it all fits together into what users get as a NFL experience.
The NFL has had a digital presence for a long time. NFL.com has existed in one form or another, like more than 15 years. And then one of the earlier iPhone applications, and even on Apple TV before it had apps. So we've been around the block in the digital landscape for a long time. Over the more recent years, we've shifted to have a direct consumer presence with NFL Plus. And so that is really the focus on our website, our iPhone, Android apps, as well as our connected TV apps. And so we really have the main application you would just refer to as NFL if you were searching for it anywhere.
Yeah.
We also have a fantasy football product, NFL Fantasy, both on the website, which uses both a mixture of an older PHP front end as well as React Native in places that we're reusing with our React Native application there. So then iOS and Android, of course, we have 3 different mobile apps right now built with React Native: NFL, NFL Fantasy, and NFL Network. Most of these applications are also, for the audience, I know we have a global audience for this podcast.
Yeah.
Most of our products are focused pretty squarely on the US market. That's where our business rights allow us, but we do still have some free video content outside of the US, and then more of our games are available through products from DAZN and other sports streamers. And then on the connected TV front, that's really where the number of platforms kind of magnifies greatly there. So we're currently available on Roku, which has its own code base. React Native cannot run on Roku today, but if anybody listening thinks that they can make that happen, I would be certainly excited for that. And then we're on Apple TV, Fire TV, Android/Google TV, LG, Vizio, and Xbox. And so we kind of treat those as three different teams, but React Native is the core across all of the non-Roku platforms there. And then our video player is also built with React Native, utilized on all of those mobile applications, NFL.com, and every one of the team's websites as well.
That's really exciting. And I'm like literally excited to sort of ask you all those questions about code sharing and like how it's all structured, considering such a widespread adoption. That's pretty awesome. One thing that always excited me, because, MLS is also sort of a similar business, just operating in a different, I would say, spurs activity. It always impressed me how companies like this go very deeply technical, considering that, when I look at Poland or European organizations, they don't seem to be such tech savvy with having so many, product offerings for the customers. So it's just I guess a mix of different structure and a business model. But when I first realized that you were pursuing such a sort of deep technical adoption at so many different levels, that was pretty exciting. So that's pretty cool. You mentioned one thing that actually got me very interested, which was that you were on the Apple TV before it even had an app store. Were you part of like the Apple platform release showcased as an app, or like how did you get on the device in that case?
So that predates me and how we actually got on there. I was more involved with...
Is it that old, actually? The Apple TV?
Yeah.
Could be. Oh, my God.
I want to say that tvOS as a platform came out probably 8 or 9 years ago at this point, before 4K. And so those apps, users didn't choose which apps were on their TVs or which were on their Apple TV, and they couldn't remove them either. And so the interesting piece there was, obviously over that period of time, there were system changes we were making on our side, and we got to the point where we knew this app wasn't going to work anymore. And you have to work directly with Apple to have that removed from the old platforms. And I remember reading some articles over time. Every time the big players would get removed, the news stopped reporting on that a few years back, but it's definitely an interesting process and how that would work. Yeah. And it had a whole different, it wasn't a native app. It was more web-based, but had a pretty subset of what you could do there. Did look at the code a little bit one time a few years back, but glad to have the full power of React Native on tvOS today, for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to derail that conversation towards that route, but it is certainly exciting. I used to do a little bit of TV development on the side, and I was surprised to realize that you can even send the JavaScript code over the satellite signal, which to me was like, how is that even possible? And then it turns out it's like a whole thing, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, back to the main topic. I think that sets the context really well. And, since you mentioned that you sort of originate from the web team, I guess before we go into the details of your application, let's quickly talk about how the adoption actually started. I'm guessing was the web product already a React interface from the very beginning, and then you started looking towards your other platforms, or like what's the story of React, and how did you get involved with it, and then how it sort of spread towards the other platforms?
When I joined the team, we were right on the cusp of launching our first large React page. So the team had been like really deep into React for about a year at that point. And then shortly thereafter, we launched superbowl.com as a React website. And then that summer, we launched the NFL.com homepage and a number of other sub pages here and there on React. And the team had a pretty cool server rendering, like isomorphic engine that before the Next.js and Remix existed, we built one called Wildcat that was pretty cool at that time. And then we still had a mixture of YUI, which I never really got into, but it was a Yahoo front end, as well as our React pages kind of spread throughout. And then based on, at that time, we also had native iOS and Android teams, separate, of course. And that was a version of each of those applications. And I think shortly after I started, my boss joined, and he had worked with React Native previously. Obviously, the some of our web developers were excited by what React Native had at that time. I think it was in the either .30s or .40s. So this is in the 2017 timeframe. Around the end of 2017, all of our front-end engineering teams got together. I think the general business environment was that we needed to figure out how to move faster and do more with the same or even less people. And so React Native, especially based off of my boss's previous experience, really fit a lot of those bills or requirements. And so a large web team, we kind of all merged with the iOS and Android native teams and started from total Greenfield at the very end of 2017 with a target goal of launching an application before the 2018 season. Over the course of that startup, we're starting fresh with nothing, total new repo, and building out the CI with native developers who understood Fastlane and web developers who understood Webpack. So initially, I'm thinking back here, we used Hall instead of Metro at the very beginning because it was closely aligned to Webpack.
Yeah, that's insane. That's insane. Yeah. I was looking for credentials back then. If only I knew you guys were using that. That's pretty exciting to hear. So it seems like you sort of landed on this idea as a result of, just from what I'm hearing, your sort of executive team having very good memories of React Native and some business goals that sort of drove towards sort of researching a better way, and React Native happens to be, I think it still is probably one of the very few solutions on the market that ticks all the boxes, if not the only one. And so what was the reaction of your native engineering team? It seems like you guys had a very good collaboration, which is great. That's always the dead spot across native and web where the knowledge gets lost. But it's not so easy when native engineers feel like, this is a subpar experience, we're not going to adapt it. So what was it like at NFL? And it seems like it was different. So I'd be down to understand what was it that you did that made it so successful and smooth?
A lot of the native engineers, we kind of split ourselves up. At that time, we split ourselves up between a couple different focus areas. So our core platform team focus had brought in most of the native engineers where we could really understand the project and the native elements of React Native. And I think it's interesting, we chose from the very beginning to use Swift and Kotlin for the native pieces. So it always made it a little bit more interesting every time we went to upgrade. And now the community or the main branch is using Swift there as well. But so our native engineers thought it was interesting. It was exciting. This was 8 years ago at this point. So most of those folks have moved on to other opportunities now, but they were able to take the opportunity and be excited by it. Some of them eventually were like, I really would prefer to focus on the native experience. And they pursued those opportunities. And so we still have to maintain a good mixture there. We have certainly both the vendor, third-party SDK environment has changed a lot over the years. But when we first started our project, we really couldn't get any NPM packages for things like analytics, video playback, anything. So very quickly, we needed those native engineers in order to build a React Native app that does what we needed it to do. And so we were deep into bridging at that time. And we have a lot less native code today than we did then. But it was critical to have those native engineers at that time in order to maintain and build out new functionality. Certainly on the React developer side, I think this is a standard story. It was incredibly exciting to see your capabilities go from I can make a website to I can make mobile applications now. And then it took us a couple more years before we expanded beyond that to we're making all of our applications. And then even some of our teams have gotten to the point where they're set up really as full stack teams with node development environment as well. Yeah,
that's pretty exciting. And you mentioned that some of the folks decided to sort of pursue different paths and sort of career opportunities. Was there, I guess the answer is yes, considering your size, just from the pure probability perspective, but was there any developers that decided to sort of adapt React Native, sort of switch from iOS or Android development and sort of go towards the React Native side? And how did you facilitate that process? Did they do it on their own or...
I think the team as a whole, when we took on the React Native project, everybody was starting fresh because even our web team, React Native was different than React, of course. We had to learn all new primitives. We had to decide at that moment we were building not just a new mobile application, but a whole new digital game experience for our website as well. And so we really adopted taking on the React Native primitives, using React Native web. So all parties, whether it was web or native developers, we knew we were kind of starting at ground zero and had to learn what this new environment was. And everybody was pretty gung-ho about it, about learning, getting into that world. And I'd say not everyone who was working there at the time is still in React Native, but I mean, maybe 20, 25% of the folks have maintained in that space and are still going strong today.
Nice. I mean, that's always interesting question for me to ask, because my story with React Native was that I started building iOS native application, and then at work I was tasked with building an Android version. After reading the docs, I sort of figured I'm not going to learn the Android SDK back then. I started researching alternatives, and so I kind of moved on and I sort of joined the JavaScript world. So it sounds like I may have some friends over there at NFL still today that have the same background. Because, with iOS, I think, I'm not sure about today's market in the US, but at least in Poland back in the day, there was this general perception that iOS development was premium. And, like all the engineers building for Apple platform were, having the nicest swag, great hardware, great salaries. So it kind of felt like in some places like a downgrade, but I think now JS is kind of cool. So it shouldn't be bad perception or something like that.
I think that, that's an interesting, I agree with that native engineers were definitely garnering a higher wage, whether that was internal or external parties, and that obviously we're able to do more with fewer people whenever that number, same top dollar number, can be divided more. But still, I think today, certainly less so at times, but we see with iOS 26 coming out and WWD's, like the fact that you are building native apps really does come through and show itself time and time again over the years here. And I think, at least for me, that continues to be reinforced as why React Native is so great of a platform. Sure, there are ways that you can see it if you're always using touchable opacity, like you see that and you don't change the thing, right? There are tells, but it feels like it is a native app and you get those benefits immediately whenever they're changed if you're using those platform-specific primitives underneath.
Yeah, isn't it funny how touchable opacity became somewhat the default for so long? Like, I think it's just because of the docs, but I'm guilty as well. I'm using it all the time, just muscle memory at this point, even though the team was always very bullish about the pressable. It's just like and there was the hardware feedback as well, but it was just longer to type. So that's quite funny. Anyway, you also mentioned Hall and Webpack. So I kind of wanted to ask you why. Like, was there some specific requirements given your web adoption of React, or why did you decide to go that route initially instead of a packager? I guess was the name back then.
Oh, right. Yes, I couldn't even remember. But the two big things that I remember were the folks who were really leading the platform initiative at that time were deep into Webpack from our work with the web. And so years of experience there that would allow us to make any tweaks necessary. And then the really big second one is we utilize a mono repo structure. So we broke up, initially we were like, we're going to have our component library here, our shared native code here, our video player here. And so we needed symlinks to work. And that took a very long time with Metro. Once they adopted it, we were finally able to make the switch over to it. But symlinks were huge for us from the very beginning. And so that was probably the biggest reason.
From what I understand, you sort of ended up eventually migrating back to Metro. And, considering your latest talk at App.js, I'm guessing you guys are, sort of on the Expo platform these days. So it seems like even though you started Greenfield, still, you sort of went through multiple stages of perhaps rewrites or upgrades. So I kind of wanted to jump maybe a few steps ahead and ask you whether you got everything right from the get-go, or you sort of, had to rewrite, or some, had a few painful rewrites perhaps. And what was that journey like eventually?
Definitely, we didn't make every right decision from the beginning. I'm just trying to think back to where we were. One big thing that for us at the time, and I haven't kept up with this particular piece of the landscape was we started off using React native navigation from the Wix team, and they were super responsive to us and helpful. And at that time, it was the only way to get the native primitives in your navigation. But there were quickly some items, especially on Android, that didn't quite operate the way we needed to, and our roadmaps didn't align. So we had to have a very focused hackathon across all of our team to rip out React Native navigation and put in React navigation. And we haven't changed back from there yet, although I'm excited to try Expo Router because we have some next projects, and file-based routing is interesting to me as well.
That's quite a big deal, actually. Speaking from the perspective of if anybody's working on it, right? I always keep asking, the sort of Next.js migration, like the sort of cross-platform story for Next.js users on the web can be tricky these days, right? So I get the appeal of switching to the same paradigm on the React Native side as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to explore some of that in the upcoming few months, but we're not deep into that at this point. But I'm excited by it. Back to the beginning then, we were debating between React XP, which was I think kind of Microsoft vibe of native primitive or React primitives to target both web and native. And then we decided to go with React Native Web, and that has paid off nicely because that is still very strongly maintained in the world. And we use that across our video player, our website, and our connected TV applications for the web targets. From a more platform side of things, we knew we wanted a monorepo structure, and then so that obviously made us go towards the Hall path. But as we added in more projects, so we initially thought we were going to start with the smaller project of NFL Network and ended up needing to switch that over. And the flagship NFL mobile application was our first project that we got in there. And the shared digital game experience components were built as part of a sub-library or component library there that we would be publishing to NPM for consumption on our website, which was at that time in a separate project. And so then as we spun up our fantasy React Native application, we brought our React Web components into the same mono repo. We spun up a NFL Network application and then connected after that. And slowly over time, we brought more things into the mono repo, and that identified some other edge cases. Over the years, we have built out a lot of the functionality that we can take for granted in some more modern mono repo tooling. But one other tease for the future, I'm excited to look into NX and dependency graph that it provides us. But basically, we built all of our own pipelines to try to be a little bit smarter about what files were changed. So we didn't run every single unit test. We didn't build every native app. But a lot of that, as you mentioned, my app.js talk, we've rebuilt all of our native pipeline over the last year because we knew App Center wasn't going to be an option for us. I wouldn't necessarily say that was a wrong choice for us. We couldn't predict 5 years, 7 years later that they were going to shut it down. But I'm very happy where we are now with the Expo build system and everything. I'd say it's a bit of an evolution. Some decisions we just outgrew as we grew, as added more and more things to the repo. Dodged a couple bullets over, like with some luck on our decisions there. But I guess one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but we're actually on our second version of a React Native application for the flagship NFL mobile app. And so we, again, were able to start a second Greenfield application, kind of reevaluate those technical decisions. The team who's really focused on that app. And so we're able to take a look and see what's the latest and greatest state management here, or insert any part of the React Native decision-making tree here. And so we did get the opportunity there with a second flagship app to remake all of those decisions. So a mixture of things. We didn't get some of the, I guess I'm rambling a little bit here, but for that piece, we did make some decisions in the first app that we realized we outgrew, and we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to start and build another application and get a whole new benefit.
Yeah. So just to clarify, do you mean a second version of the same flagship app, or is it just a separate flagship app for a different purpose?
A net new version. We released it with the same application ID and bundle identifier, but a brand new set of code for that
I see.
application.
So
And
that
the
was
team
a second
launched that
Greenfield.
last year. Yeah, second.
And
yes.
Okay, that's why I was trying to clarify that. So it seems like, when I speak and interview a lot of people, I always go through the migration strategy, and there is different sort of brownfield approaches that people follow, either from bottom up or top down. And it's just like many different ways. Some of them never actually finish the migration and just sort of end up somewhere in between. And it seems like your organization specifically is the sort of greenfield migration strategy, which is just going to start from the ground up. How is that? Like, where is that coming from? I would assume there is a lot of functionalities in the NFL app. I'm guessing for the browsing teams, the statistics, and news. So it's not just like something you can release in a week or two.
Right.
Is this because, it's just, at the end of the day, better, even though it's going to take a year, it's just going to pay off better in your specific case than brownfield? Or did you, like, where is that decision coming from?
So, the first one, when we did that back in 2017, 2018, really, it was about combining. So we didn't have two different native applications. And I agree with you. It's super exciting over the last year what you guys have done and the community has done to make brownfield a much more approachable thing here. Very different story back then. I don't think anybody, because there was a time where, so we maintained pretty complicated business rights to where you can and can't watch games and how you can do it. And there were some questions about how much of that experience could be put into maybe one of our team's applications. And we were trying to figure out if we could make a library of that, and the complexity and the size even, right, before we had pre-compiled binaries and all of those things was kind of prohibitive. And so the first version of our application really was about combining the iOS and Android apps to provide a consistent experience between those. We launched the first version of the app when we were initially able to provide the live game streams for free to our users. And so that was one of the motivations of putting that in there. And then about 3 years ago, we launched our direct-to-consumer product, NFL Plus, and that was also a fundamental shift for our business in the types of things that we wanted to focus on. And we recognized that the original application was built for a different time of our business. And so it also benefited from a ground-up rethink of what it should be, what audience it should serve. And so Greenfield made more sense for that as well.
You're listening to React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform with React and React Native. That makes a lot of sense. And I think an interesting insight that I didn't think about initially when you were explaining your journey is that it is also a good opportunity for you to revisit certain things, maybe change the UX, get rid of some screens, add in new ones. So I guess the Greenfield decision implied there was going to be some discussions that you wouldn't have otherwise, such as design and planning and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. Now, I guess very briefly at the beginning, when we talked about the sort of reasoning behind apps and React Native, you mentioned sort of wanting to ship more with less resources, which effectively just means same resources can ship even more, but perhaps, sharing code and stuff like that. So I'm guessing, and you also mentioned Super Bowl, which, every time I hear is always bound to a very strict deadline. So I'm guessing in your case, there might be something that is time sensitive, like the time to market for all the resources that you're planning to release. Was that one of the, I guess that was one of the decisive factors or the challenge you were struggling with? Anything beyond that, you were trying to figure from the business and product perspective that sort of kick-started those discussions?
A lot of our products are CMS driven. And so being able to have a shared component library, at least between your iOS and Android app, and eventually we got to a level where even if they weren't the exact same UI component, we're able to configure things pretty similarly between our connected TV applications and our website. So the way in which our content management teams want to present the stories that the NFL has to offer, as well as, like you said, we have pretty immovable targets in time. They're going to play football regardless of what our products are doing, but we want to be there to let our fans see it right along with the folks in the stadium. And then really, like you mentioned, being able to deliver across more things with the same number or even fewer number of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm assuming that, the decision has been made at a certain point in time. We can't pick any random month. It took some time, right, to ship. So I guess for the time being, as that was in progress, you were maintaining two versions of the same product. One, which was the one pending development, and the other that was currently live. So was that, from the product perspective, I think this is regardless of the React Native adoption, sometimes people just go with that approach where they work on something from a different branch and they will effectively eventually replace it. So at your example, did you continue developing the product itself or while the React Native was pending, or was your primary concern on bug fixes and you sort of froze the feature development while the rewrite was pending?
The original version of the React Native app is a little fuzzier now as it was so far ago or so many years ago, but we definitely did still have teams that were maintaining that. And there were a couple areas where, like I mentioned, the live game, we did some work in the version 2 is what we called it, the last native version, just to make sure that if anything happened with our React Native app and its deadline slipped, we would still be able to meet all of those delivery deadlines for the beginning of the season. And similar when like version 3 of the mobile app was the first React Native one, and now we're on version 4, which that's where we discussed that second Greenfield transition. And really, we try to minimize any of the work on the soon-to-be deprecated or sunset version of the application. But there are examples here and there where we had to do a little bit of work just to cover ourselves in case we needed more time to finish the new product. And that similar thing is true where I talked a little bit about our older version of the web, but even over the last few years, we've had a mixture of React web applications inside of .NET web applications, and there was transitions there, as well as we're undergoing another transition where we're adopting more Next.js into our website now. And so multiple across pretty much all of our platforms, we're making those decisions where we want to have the team focus, so we shift resources over to the new project. And that's where the product team, the engineering team, and the design teams are really looking for everything to go forward. But the reality is we have timelines and like game events or tentpole events we talk about a lot. There's in the off season, right after the Super Bowl, we have the combine and the draft. And so there's always things that are happening that basically we still have to have a version of the incumbent application that is going to give our fans everything they need, while at the same time we're working on what's next that will delight them for the future. Yeah,
that makes sense. I was guessing that regardless of your preference, you had to keep the app somewhat up to date with all the time-sensitive and season-based releases. I'm guessing one of the features that was possibly a positive impact during the first Greenfield migration was perhaps the fact that React Native seems to be more JSON-friendly. At least I remember having a lot of pain sort of parsing the CMS and iOS pieces, trying to display things from dynamic UI through just data collection and display. So I'm guessing that just made your life much easier to work with.
Yeah, I mean, when we built that first Greenfield app, we actually adjusted it to use the same CMS that we were like sort of homegrown-y CMS that we were using on our website. And so that definitely helped. I think the version 2 of the mobile app actually just had a static JSON file that I remember hearing people talk about being quite a difficult thing to maintain and then interact with on the client side. So definitely we were able to take advantage of some newer CMS functionality and consolidate that across different of our platforms.
Yeah, that makes sense. So sort of jumping more towards the today's reality, your recent talk on App.js was, on CI/CD improvements. We'll get to them in a second. But most importantly, what stands out is the use of Expo, which I'm guessing is the V2 version of the flagship app. And my question is, was the V1 Expo as well, or that was a sort of bare React Native experience?
Yeah, so it was bare from the time we started the apps. And Knit, I don't even think we ever ejected, right? Like at that time, we knew we needed a video player, we needed analytics, we needed all of these things that didn't exist in the market. So we've tracked myself and our teams have tracked the evolution of Expo over the years. And for years and years, we'd see new announcements and new cool things of theirs, but the native module story was still such that we were going to have to eject to use it anyways. And so the juice wasn't going to be worth the squeeze in rebuilding or adopting all of that. Kind of one of the first dominoes in that was we have a lot of images in our applications, and we were using Fast Image, and Fast Image announced that they were no longer going to be maintaining it, and Expo Image was a really good substitute replacement. And so it's like, all right, well, in order to get Expo Image, you kind of have to do the whole thing. And so all right, we'll wait a little bit on that before we do it. And then the App Center shutdown provided us a really good motivating point. And that second, or the Mobile 4 application, or the second Greenfield application, actually started fully as a bare application as well. And across all of our applications, we layered in Expo over the course of last year. We started working on it around like August or September or so, and then started with CLI, switched over to just build the app with CLI, and then integrated the SDK, and then added a couple more SDKs to take advantage of different functionality. We are not currently using continuous native generation, one of the big features that the team talks about, so that you don't have to commit and maintain your iOS and Android folders. There's a combination of, we haven't quite gotten around to taking all of our native code and making it compatible with the Expo module, or even, we've looked at Nitro, but we're going to do Expo for the time being. So we're working slowly through these migrations, and then would like to eventually take advantage of that continuous native generation as well.
Yeah, I think, eventually, I also remember back in the day when, there was this huge divide between, Expo sort of walled garden and the sort of brewery native application, which made it very hard for many companies to adapt it. But these days, when I reflect onto what is Expo, I'm sometimes even asking myself, question, what is Expo these days? Because if you approach this from the perspective of what it was 5, 6, or 7 years ago, it is a totally different thing. And you can be using Expo without, I think the CNG is the sort of successor to pre-builds or ejects. Yeah. But the traditional Expo type of workflow, I think it's sort of not that widely recommended anymore. So it seems to me that as soon as you start adapting all those Expo modules, SDK, which is huge when you effectively end up using Expo just out of the box automatically. And then at one point, switching CNG on, you just realize you have iOS and Android folders that just sitting there for nothing. I mean, you might be having some native code that you can move around, but rather than that, this is fairly simple process. So it's, much easier to get started with it. I mean, your case, it shows that to adapt it, you can just plug in Expo modules and that's it. And that's already a huge win.
Yeah, I mean, and we're using EAS Build as well. And you don't have to, right? You can run whatever kind of workflow you want there. But we take heavy advantage of the fingerprint functionality that you get with the EAS fingerprint and layers into all of that to try to not to rebuild more than necessary. I mean, there's other options out there like enterprise framework and things, but that's important for us. Is we have a lot of different teams making pull requests that you don't want to confuse folks. Like, oh, why is there a new version of the app? Nobody's actually changed anything in this one. And so that's where really I see the CI/CD piece and how EAS builds and the Expo SDK and everything fits into that kind of improving the developer experience, and then by proxy, or as a result, helping your business teams, help everybody deliver the end result. Yeah,
that makes sense. I think my take on this was always that it's better to have options. So even with the enterprise framework, I'm honestly, we're in the stage after the decision has been made. So I'm not here to sort of convince anybody. From my perspective, it is probably, and we even say that ourselves, better for you to use Expo because it's such a great project. But sometimes, for many reasons, we cannot migrate clients to Expo, and then that can be, at a enterprise scale, that can be anything, including legal reasons that are beyond our realization and control, and in which case it's good to provide them with some sort of a fallback. But effectively, I guess, even with Nitro modules, it's always, the consequence of that is always some sort of a healthy development. So I think that's great. Quick question on the migration itself. Assuming, you mentioned a couple of times having some native libraries. The fast image was one of them. I also recall the video component. When you were migrating to Expo SDK, did you end up migrating or replacing all of them with the Expo SDK, and you sort of took this we'll go Greenfield Expo SDK approach as well, or you ended up carrying over some of these externals, even though Expo SDK was offering something of a similar scope as well?
We didn't take we have to replace everything with Expo approach. There were certain areas, I think permissions is one, images, as I mentioned before, where maybe the previous version from the community that we were using was not as maintained, or we checked to see where it stood in the new architecture preparation phases. And so selectively, we did switch over to some of the Expo provided versions. Our video player, we have pretty specific needs across all of the platforms. And so we take advantage of formerly Theo Dolby OptiView player, which handles all of the React Native wrapping code and module code for us. And then there's still a few other things where we have maintained our own native functionality. And you don't have to really do anything. If it's already linked in your native project and your modules already exist, we didn't have to change any of those in order to take advantage of what the rest of the things that Expo had to offer for us. So that was really nice. And we're able to selectively choose things when maybe there was an additional feature or a number of additional features or better web support, for instance, on the Expo version. Yeah. And so we could choose those strategically.
Michael, going to your app.js talk, which, by the way, we're dropping the link in the notes, and I strongly recommend watching. I wanted to ask, now that we know your Greenfield story and Greenfield migration from an already Greenfield React Native application, description of your talk is actually about legacy CI/CD infrastructure migration. So I wanted to ask you if the legacy CI/CD is the original native pipeline, or is that the V1 Greenfield CI/CD, or like what is it even a legal CI/CD infrastructure in the context of your rather bleeding edge setup here?
I meant our 1 to 1.5-ish version of the React Native NFL monorepo CI/CD pipeline. And so I told a little bit of the story, but we started with everything being physical on-prem hardware, and then got to some pieces of that being on AWS. And at the time we launched, it wasn't, and we weren't using NPM, and Yarn wasn't out yet.
What was it then?
I'm blanking on the name right now.
PNPM was after Yarn. I don't even know what was there in the meantime.
It wasn't PNPM either. It was. I'm frustrated that I'm not remembering it right now, but
I'll try to find.
I guess the big thing that I talked to some other folks at the conference, and the most legacy aspect of that was definitely Jenkins. And so a couple folks who were like, I haven't heard the word Jenkins in quite some time. So, but really, when we started the React Native Greenfield project back in 2017-18, that's the beginning of that pipeline. And using Fastlane on we spun up all ourselves. And then over the course of that last year is where we were modernizing that to meet business and development objectives. And the Expo piece, modern Yarn v4, and GitHub Actions are the core of what we've put together there.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier in our recording as well, the Expo fingerprint, which saves you a lot of time. Any other practical features, either internal or from the Expo ecosystem, that you find particularly interesting or useful for your delivery architecture, considering you have monorepo, multiple products, I'm guessing multiple engineers as well?
So I don't know as much about it because it's also fresh off the presses, but very excited to dig more into the new repack feature that EAS Build has to offer. So essentially, for anybody who hasn't seen that yet, And I'll also acknowledge that Enterprise Framework has a similar functionality, but React Native obviously has two pieces to it. If you boil it down to its most basic, you have the native application and the JavaScript runtime. And so acknowledging that more often than not, and the fingerprint really powers all of that, more often than not, your native code is not changing. You're really just updating your JavaScript. And so only building a new bundle and making sure that that is in an actual compiled application versus having to rely on over-the-air updates. And that's really important because as we were starting to adopt updates internally, it inadvertently caused problems with our AQA tests because now you have a new entry point to the application. You have to know which JavaScript bundle to choose. And so being able to make sure that you're efficiently creating a new version of the application every time it changes, but only building what is necessary is really important. And I'm super excited that the community in multiple ways is getting to the point where other people can take advantage of that. Like we've tried to approximate it in ways, but that's definitely a plug that I'd say beyond what I've already talked about, that is exciting to me.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that. Actually, an interesting aspect of the Expo Repack feature is I remember actually Brent reached out to me and gave us a heads up about the name because it is
RS
similar
pack
to the Repack, and I'm like, at least we're good with the names, although we have a dash between re and pack, and they don't. But I'm like, that's a nice name anyway. So that feature I think is pretty huge, and generally speaking, I'm guessing most of the time it's just JS changes. So that is it. Michael, I sort of wanted to, as we wrap this up, I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit more about your team and culture. From the culture perspective, I think we're already having a very clear understanding idea of how you like to move and how you keep adapting all those bleeding edge features with sort of Greenfield clean cut approach, which is, I think, pretty novel considering the size of your app and your company. What is your team size? I'm interested to, we can talk about the combined number considering you're working in a monorepo. That could perhaps give us a little bit more context into the sort of size of the piece we're sort of working here with.
Focused on React Native specifically, you're thinking?
Probably. I mean, that is an interesting question. I'm also just curious from the people involved in the monorepo, on a daily basis, just to get an idea of the scale.
On a daily basis, we're getting PRs from 20 to 30 developers. We've split it up, like I mentioned before, between our mobile application, which has 5 to 10 different times, our fantasy application, which has a couple less people than that, and then our web team is growing right now as we are focusing on kind of getting things back into React via Next.js. Our identity management team is also built on Next.js and has 3 to 5 engineers at different times. Our connected TV team is one of our largest because we effectively split that into 3 teams, with the Roku team having 5 to 6 engineers, and our more React Native, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV team focused with a similar size team, and then a more web via React Native web focused team that's a little bit smaller than that. And so we have an e-commerce focused team as well, which works on both the front end and back end pieces of that. And so, all in all, we have a decent sized team whenever everything's considered, but we're definitely expected to hit a lot of platforms with all of those folks.
Makes sense. And how do you keep it all up and running and organized? I mean, 20 to 30 people submitting PRs a day, that's a lot. And I'm guessing you must have a very convenient CI/CD pipeline for testing as well. But how do you keep this organized and moving so that you don't end up with 120 PRs to review at the end of the week?
Yeah, I mean, we have team members who have specific focus areas on both my team and other teams within the NFL engineering group. And so everybody's able to have a relatively narrower focus. There's a member of our team who leads web, who leads each of those areas or each application that I mentioned. And so they don't have to focus on 100 PRs, but that's how we help with the people efficiency. And then we're also starting to explore using some of Copilot and Claude to help give a first pass on some of these pull requests. This is very new for us, but it's exciting to see so you're not going in with no context. I mean, obviously an engineering lead is aware of what work their team's going to be taking on, but that's helping us cut down on some of that time as well. And then between the fingerprint, at least when you're looking at the CI/CD side, between the Expo fingerprint and some more basic pattern matching or file type matching that we built in our own custom node scripts, we're able to more dynamically choose which one of our builds to run or just immediately prove as success or respond successful within our GitHub pipeline. That just reminded me, one thing I thought was pretty interesting. We used to be very intentional about only running certain tests in our Jest test suite. And then there were some like memory leaks and things, like every time we update things that gets a little bit more complicated. But as we migrated to GitHub Actions, we identified, I don't know if it was because of the resolution was taking too much overhead. We removed that dynamic testing logic and our tests became faster. So instead of trying to say, I will only execute the tests related to the NFL mobile application, we run all of our unit tests, hard coding platform, to iOS one time, Android another time, and web a third time.
Yeah.
So each different subsets, make sure we hit all of the cases. But I thought it was pretty interesting that making it just run through all of them with, some parallelization ended up being faster than trying to do it selectively.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the point behind premature optimization as well, right? Like we can see it right here when we often say not use memo or, don't optimize because the optimization might be more expensive than the code itself. Yeah. I think that's exactly it right here, which is really interesting. I think, Michael, that gives us all a very good overview of what you guys have accomplished and what is up and running at your organization. From my perspective, I wanted to say it's perhaps the first time or one of the very few times where I hear somebody at such a scale adapting sequentially and consequently this Greenfield approach. I think it's a very novel and interesting and exciting way to get started with bleeding edge technologies, and perhaps one of the reasons why you can, say you're very bullish and all in with Expo ecosystem using some of the latest features, even though your product is quite, has its age. It's not like you've released the project itself last year. So that's really impressive. I wanted to say, Michael, it was, from my perspective, very exciting to talk with you today. I think there is always this question I keep asking the folks I speak with. Is there any advice that you'd recommend or a unique take or anything really that comes to your mind as far as, let's imagine there is somebody listening to this podcast thinking about adapting React Native, listening to this story, looking for some references or having some doubts. Is there anything that you feel like would be something that you wanna say to them? Anything that comes to your mind?
I'd say do it. First of all, it is worth it. Do it in a monorepo structure. But the advantages you get, like you are building a native application and you have the luxury. This is not novel so much, but you have the luxury of being able to do that and having a shared code base that does that across all of the things. I'd say one of the areas where we are more niche, more unique there is that it doesn't have to stop at iOS and Android. And I think that has proved critical to our success as an engineering team. You can take that, of course, the most common next step would be web and how you utilize it there, but it also doesn't end there, right? Like whether it is a version of React Native that supports Vision OS even before it's released or on day one of release, or for us, in our case, all the major CTV platforms so that you can get your app on the biggest screens for your fans or your customers, wherever it is, to watch the video. Obviously, everybody has slightly different business use cases, but React Native allows you to deliver your product anywhere, and I can't recommend it enough.
That's pretty great take, honestly. Michael, it was very nice to have you here on our podcast. I will be super happy to interview you once again during the V3 phase of your app. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And wish you best of luck with whatever is up next on your roadmap. And having lots of success adopting even more of the latest and greatest features of React Native in the ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you very much as well. Pleasure.
Michael was my guest today. He's Director of Engineering at NFL, and I'm Mike, co-founder and CTO at Callstack. And this was a React Native. Oh, Jesus. This was not this was React Native, but I wanted to say this was React Universe on the Enterprise series where we talk with enterprise companies and, where we talk with enterprise companies about their use of React Native at scale. Thank you.